I grew up in Adelaide and I trained as a registered nurse at the Royal Adelaide Hospital and Flinders University. Then I specialised in intensive care, high dependency and hyperbaric nursing. That gave me great opportunities to learn because when you work in those places, you're working with the best clinicians around, so you learn a lot from them. And it was a wonderful time in my life to do all of that, to care for the sickest people in the state, essentially, in intensive care. So that was wonderful. When I had my son, I decided after that to have a change of career path, and I moved to first aid training. I love first aid training, but I really felt that there was a problem with it, that it was very PowerPoint, classroom based, and I didn't feel that that properly prepared people for what they might actually have to see and the conditions that they might have to work in if they're dealing with trauma. So I wanted to find ways to add realism into that type of training. That search took me to the USA, where I undertook some moulage courses, which is like special effects makeup for creating traumatic injuries. On coming back to Australia, I started TraumaSim with the concept of still training but providing that as a service as well, and it grew to the point that I moved full-time into doing that. That was back in 2008. Over the time, TraumaSim has continued to slowly grow in different directions, and last year we had the opportunity to acquire a business in the USA that does the same thing. Military Moulage is that business. So that's given us an opportunity to grow, yeah, it's all up from here. We started with the service of going into the field and creating realistic injuries onto role players and mannequins for those trainers in the field to work with. That was initially all of our business, and then we saw that there was a need to have some realistic training aids for them to do the practicing of skills. So for example, when you're learning to use a tourniquet for a massive hemorrhage, there's a classroom lesson to learn how to do that, and you can practice putting it on yourself, but it's nothing like the realism that you will have to deal with when you put a tourniquet on when a casualty is bleeding to death in front of you. There is a huge amount of blood and a lot of stress. So we wanted to create training aids that people could practice over and over and over under those stress conditions. So our first one was the tourniquet trainer, and then we developed other training aids to learn to pack wounds that were hemorrhaging and other skills that people need to learn to repeat their skills over and over. So that grew. Once we started that project took off, and now that's about 70% of our business is the manufacture and sales of those task trainers. We also make individual wounds that can be put onto mannequins or role players that are more for nursing chronic wounds and things like that, for nurses to learn to recognise in their training. And we teach moulage workshops as well, so that people can learn to do a little bit of their own moulage for their own organisations and get into that themselves. We make surgical wounds, we make pressure injuries that, more chronic conditions that hospitalised patients will see, diabetic ulcers, all of those types of things. We also make a range of wearable wounds that are designed to be put on rapidly. So moulage itself takes a little bit of time to do, to have those wounds ready in the field. So what we made were these strap-on wearable products that are already made with injuries into them, and so people can just put those on very quickly and have some realism in their training without having to go to the full efforts of moulage if they haven't got time or the ability to do that. They're all made here in Perth. We have a workshop out at Midvale, and we have a team of staff there. All of these products are individually handmade. So new wounds, for example, start out as a sculpture and an artistic piece, and then from that we go on to making moulds from them and then we can reproduce them over and over again. So yeah, definitely the Australian-made part of what we do, we're very, very proud of, and we've just been recognised to be allowed to use the Australian-made logo. So we're very happy with that. Well, the sectors that we service are, I guess if I put them into categories, it's defence, police, paramedics, including Royal Flying Doctor, the education sector, so universities, first aid training, Royal College of Surgeons, Royal College of GPs, transport, rail, aviation and road transport, and also mining, oil and gas. Anywhere that does mass casualty training exercises, that fits well with what we do, but also right down to a first aid course as well. Defence would be our number one for sure. Police is also quite big, followed by universities, mining and aviation. But defence is probably, I'd have to say, about 70% of our work. We sell a large amount of our part-task trainers for hemorrhage control into the Israeli Defence Force through a distributor in Israel. That's been a very, very strong, long-standing client of ours now. We also have quite strong ties into the Middle East. We have a distributor in Dubai that covers that whole region for us. That's taken us into Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, through that whole region really, which is very strong for us. The USA, that's been a growing market for us, but we have also toured into Singapore as well. Increasingly, we're getting a lot of interest out of Europe also. I did some training with Military Moulage back in 2010, and I'd continued a bit of a relationship with them all that time. I was buying products from them, and a couple of times I'd gone back to the US to do sort of top-up training. So we had that ongoing relationship, and then the owner of that, Suzanne Patterson, was really looking to retire and step away from it. So the opportunity was there to purchase the business. Gave it 5 minutes thought and decided to go at it. Well, it is a small business. It's based in Chantilly, Virginia, which is just outside of Washington, DC, about a half an hour's drive. But they have a 15-year history and relationships across the US military. They've been providing moulage training in the form of workshops, quite advanced moulage courses to the Defence Forces across the USA for a long time, including having a lot of international clients from other militaries overseas coming to train with them, and an online store selling moulage products. So that's been their sort of history. And what I really want to do with it is to continue that, but also add to that the task trainers that we already manufacture in Australia and bring that into the US as well. The US business is going to allow us an easier path into selling into the US. So we're really anticipating that there'll be a large amount of growth there. Even with that, we still plan to have our base here in Perth and keep our Australian manufacturing aspect to it and just have the sales going into these other areas. We may pick up staff along the way that we'll need in those zones and distributors and various partnerships, but definitely keen to have our Australian base here in Perth. Association with the Australian Defence Force came about through Army about 11 years ago now it would be, and that was to provide moulage and our task trainers for the pre-deployment training for the soldiers going into Afghanistan and Iraq. Part of that is their combat first aid preparedness, and so we've been heavily involved in that over the years. That's been ongoing work for every deployment into that region. We also sell our task trainers direct to Defence. We have some NATO stock numbers, and so they can order direct for those types of products. We've had quite a good relationship with the SAS medics at Swanbourne, and we've had a long-standing relationship with them going in and providing realistic moulage for their advanced first aid courses that they do. We also have had a good relationship with the Army School of Health in Albury-Wodonga, And we have gone over there recently and provided workshops for them and task trainers. And yeah, we have a good ongoing relationship there. They help me too. They tell me things that they require and we discuss what would be useful, and then we find ways to make that happen. And so it's quite a good backwards and forwards relationship. We've had some very interesting jobs with those sorts of resource clients. We've gone to some very remote sites out in the middle of nowhere and provided realistic injuries for their mass casualty training exercises. One of the requirements for airports is to run a realistic training scenario every couple of years, and that's assessed by CASA standards. And that's taken us to some interesting mining site airports. We've been to Barrow Island and run activities out there. We've done jobs for Chevron at their Wheatstone big gas plants. Amazing places to go and see and be a part of, but it's also great to see them taking their training of their personnel so seriously. They understand that at the back end of what they do, there is inherent risk. They try to minimise it as best they can, but they also do prepare for the worst. And that's where we come in as a way to help them train in a realistic manner to do that. And so yeah, we've been out to Kalgoorlie and underground and all sorts of places. When we first started, it was so new and exciting. To get our first work into the Army in Australia was a big step, and we were very, very happy about that. That was a huge learning curve and loved being a part of that. I think the next big step up for us was sales into Israel. That was a very, very large order and the biggest that we'd had to date, and so that was a big achievement. Beyond that, the USA acquisition last year was very, very big. But I'd have to say the other moment that we were very, very proud to be associated with was we made some task trainers for the Queensland Police Force when they were putting together a tactical first aid course for all of their officers. And we made some task trainers specifically for that course. Down the track, they were very successful with their program, and over an 18-month period, they documented that they'd saved 30 lives with the skills that they'd learnt through the use of those task trainers. So we were really, really pleased to know that they were actually making a difference in the real world. And then late last year, that police course won the Global Police Award in London. So we were really happy to have played a small part in that, and very happy to bathe in their reflected glory. I guess we've got a couple of different focuses going on at the moment. One is the growth into the US and developing that business. We're doing a lot of work to make that happen behind the scenes, even though we can't go there at the moment. So that's part of our growth. We're also partnering with some other organisations and coming up with some new research and development for some new products that we're really hoping will be ready to be released in a few months' time. So there was a lot of new opportunities, very much related to what we already do, but just continuing on and branching out a little bit further. We're looking to grow our manufacturing here, employ more staff, and essentially export as much of our product as we can, really.